folks a few moments to join us, I'd like to give a couple highlights about some other Earth Week events that are taking place this week. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., we will be welcoming Nikki Bass, Tribal Councilwoman for the Nansemond Indian Nation of Virginia, and Associate Director of the Science Policy Division at the Environmental Protection Agency. And she will be welcoming Winona LaDuke, economist and Executive Director of Honor the Earth. I hope those of you that are here today will be joining us tomorrow for that event. In addition to that, we also have on Thursday, which is Earth Day, a talk with Dr. Molly Mitchell. This is a lunchtime session for our Sustainabite series, and she will be going over the local impacts of climate change to the Williamsburg area. We also have at the Muscarelli Museum of Art a photograph on exhibit by Jeff Frost. The Muscarelli Museum generously purchased this photograph, and it is called Lake Fire Milky Way Overlook. The Muscarelli Museum of Art is currently open to William & Mary students, faculty, and staff, and not currently to the public. But if you visit the website at the Muscarelli Museum of Art, you will be able to see the photo as well as access a link to the Frost time-lapse film, California on Fire. I'm going to go over just a few logistics to this event. We will be recording it, and all those who registered will receive a link in a follow-up email. Due to the webinar format, your videos and microphones are off, and although we cannot see your smiling faces, we do hope you enjoyed today's program. We have two exciting guests today, and before we begin, it is my pleasure to introduce Matthew Solomon, class of 2024, who has volunteered to read the William & Mary Land Acknowledgement today. Matthew?
Greetings. Miwatu Talkin. That is the language of Tutelo, my tribe's language. It translates to I am Indian. I'm a tribal member of the Monacan Indian Nation and the new president of the American Indian Student Association at William & Mary. On behalf of the William & Mary community, I'd like to acknowledge the federal and state recognized tribes in our region by reading our land acknowledgement statement. William & Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the land our campus is on today. The Sharon-Haka Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Patawomic, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respects to their tribal members past and present. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And if you're looking for this acknowledgement, it can be found on William & Mary's American Indian Resource Center website. The Sustainability Symposium theme this year is interconnectedness. When we talk about sustainability, we often highlight the overlap of areas like the environment, society, and the economy, and that we are striving for a harmony of these, a flourishing of people and planet. But in order for this to happen, we need to recognize our interconnectedness, that we are one ecosystem with this planet and with each other. And that with this perspective, we can listen, make decisions, and have relationships with each other and with this earth that are regenerative and positive. This theme and this event was put together this year with a number of outstanding partners that deserve many more thanks than I can possibly offer today. In alphabetical order, I'd like to thank the American Indian Resource Center and Native Studies minor, the Alumni Association, Environmental Science and Policy Program, Institute for Integrative Conservation, Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and the Student Assembly. The symposium is a two-part event, each with exceptional speakers who will talk about interconnectedness from their perspective and experience. Today, we'll take a more international approach to this topic, and tomorrow, Ms. LaDuke will take a national and closer to home look at this topic. The audience tomorrow will have the opportunity to connect with their fellow attendees to listen and discuss both events and potential ideas for how the university and we as a community can apply takeaways from our speakers. So I hope to see you all tomorrow. To really kick things off, it is now my pleasure to introduce William & Mary's 28th president, Dr. Catherine Rowe. Madam President, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Director Lake. What a great kickoff, and how wonderful to read our new land acknowledgement, to hear our new land acknowledgement read to start things off here. On behalf of William & Mary, I am delighted to welcome you to the 2021 Sustainability Symposium. I want to kick things off with a quote from William & Mary alumna Ellen Stofan. Dr. Stofan was recently named Undersecretary for Science and Research at the Smithsonian. As many of you know, she spoke at our 100th anniversary for women students just a few years ago. And when she did, she reminded us that you can't aspire to what you can't envision. Right now, the challenges that we are facing are pressing. We are more than a year into pandemic. Our world is experiencing rapid social change, much of it good, and rapid environmental change, much of it not. What we need now is a generation of leaders with the expertise and the diverse backgrounds to advance equity and justice in our nation and our communities and our ecosystems. We need them to envision the innovative solutions to global environmental challenges that we face. We need them to chart a more just and more sustainable path forward for this planet. And to achieve this, we're going to need radically to expand the community of conservationists who aspire to lead that work. William & Mary is well positioned to help tomorrow's conservation leaders envision and aspire to that future. Our research builds on a centuries-long tradition of interdisciplinary exploration that runs deep at William & Mary. It's not new. And our faculty, staff, and students combine deep expertise in research and education. We are hands-on as well as theoretical here, and we always have been. And we are resolutely international in our interests. Our global partnerships extend our reach and broaden our thinking, and that's a longstanding commitment of this university. So it's fitting that this year's Sustainability Symposium theme is interconnectedness in all the ways I've just described. Programs and presentations will explore the threads that link us to our environment and to each other around the world. Indigenous peoples and local communities who are working to protect the world's ecosystems will share their perspectives. Their expertise is critical to developing effective solutions. So we're thrilled to be expanding our community in these ways over the next couple of days. The symposium encourages active and reflective listening, a critical skill for any entrepreneur. Indigenous communities are advocating for globally important ecosystems and natural resources. So listening to their unique perspectives and stories will catalyze our ability to problem solve together. And it will make us better allies to advocate for their rights and the rights of all peoples to access to a healthy environment. I especially want to thank our guest speakers, Céline Cousteau, Beto Marubo, Nikki Bass, Winona LaDuke. It's an amazing group of human beings and experts and leaders, and we are so fortunate to have you join us. Finally, I do want to thank everyone on this call. We are grateful for your participation in this 2021 symposium, and we look forward to your partnership and good ideas as we create solutions together. Back over to you, Director Lake.
Thank you, President Rowe. Your support for this event and sustainability is truly appreciated. To provide a little more information about today, I'd like to hand things over to Erica Garut, Program Manager of the Institute for Integrative Conservation. Erica, it is all yours.
Thank you, Calandra. In the face of rapid environmental change and injustice, there's a need for radical change. And that change starts with understanding our connection to the environment and to the global community. This afternoon, Céline Cousteau, a filmmaker, social and environmental advocate, and the founder of the Jabari Project, and Beto Marubo, a member of the Marubo tribe and a representative of the Union of Indigenous Peoples of the Jabari Valley, will discuss their collaboration to share the stories of the Indigenous peoples of the Val de Jabari territory of Brazil, who are fighting for their survival and rights as guardians of globally important ecosystems, which is documented in their newly released Tribes on the Edge documentary. Through the power of storytelling, they will guide us through an intimate exploration of our own interconnectedness to the environment and to humanity at the local and global scale. This exploration of interconnectedness is the foundation of education curriculum that is currently being developed through a collaboration between the Javari Project and William & Mary's Institute for Integrative Conservation, led by undergraduate Tara Vesamp with support from Professor Catherine Lanouette. The IIC is working closely with Céline and the Javari Project team to develop curriculum that supports children's understanding of interconnectedness at local and global scales. The curriculum will be centered around the perspectives of the Marubo tribe and other indigenous communities in the Val de Javari territory as a basis for understanding interconnectedness. The IIC is thankful for the opportunity to collaborate with Céline, Beto, and the Javari Project team on this important project. And we invite you all to support the development of this education curriculum this summer and next fall. You can reach out to the IIC at iic@wm.edu to learn more. This afternoon's discussion with Céline and Beto will be moderated by Dr. Abigail Buffington, who is the Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in Environmental Science and Policy in the Anthropology Department at William & Mary. As an environmental anthropologist, Abby studies landscape formation, landscape histories, and the emergent dynamics of socio-ecological systems in the past and the present. Céline and Beto, thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And Abby, thank you for leading us through this discussion.
Stories are powerful tools for learning about and listening to different perspectives, cultures, and ways of knowing. They are also means for communities to make themselves heard. They help us understand the different challenges people are facing. They build connections and empathy, and they help us see how we are connected to and can support global communities. As an anthropologist, I appreciate how stories have endured as an important component in research. Anthropologists are beset with the task of studying us, that is, humanity. If scholars partner with one or more communities in a localized context, they can act as facilitators for these communities to share their stories scaled up to the global. Just as stories are an enduring component of human society, there have been many periods of significant interconnections in the past to similar degrees to today. Western science has struggled to understand the crucial place people and human communities occupy in the creation and maintenance of ecosystems, and Amazonia is a very salient example. Rights to land access and autonomy of use are important to that calculus, particularly when those communities are indigenous. Stories provide a means of repositioning the role of the anthropologist from scientist to student, whilst always recognizing oneself as guest, meaning these stories can facilitate critical self-reflection, a very important process when one is participating and sharing other people's stories. Stories are also profound means of knowledge transfer, intergenerationally and between peers, and this knowledge transfer and holding is impossible to underestimate in persistence of communities of practice. Landscape interaction is just as much a social experience as it is a physical one, and transmitted cultural knowledge enables ecological knowledge and the dynamic practice of lifeways. This isn't to say that storytelling only takes one form or can be framed singularly, as the practice and its purpose is highly varied cross-culturally. This afternoon, Céline Cousteau and Beto Marubo will discuss their joint effort to share the stories of the indigenous peoples of the Val de Javari territory of Brazil, who are fighting for their right for survival and as guardians of globally important ecosystems. Céline Cousteau is a filmmaker and producer, explorer, artist, storyteller, and social and environmental advocate. She is the founder-director of Cause-Centric Productions, the co-founder of Outdoor Film Fellowship, and the founder of the Javari Project, which is working to support the indigenous peoples of the Val du Javari territory. She is the daughter of ocean explorer and filmmaker Jean-Michel Cousteau and the granddaughter of Jacques Cousteau. Céline just released her Tribes on the Edge documentary that shares the story of the indigenous peoples of the Val du Javari territory in their fight for survival and guardianship over globally important ecosystems. Beto Marubo is a member and spokesperson for the Marubo tribe and a representative of and member of the Union of Indigenous Peoples of the Javari Valley and the coordination of the indigenous organizations of the Brazilian Amazon. Through the power of storytelling and video clips from Tribes on the Edge, Céline and Beto will guide us on a journey to hear stories of the indigenous peoples who have asked for their stories to be shared, and through an exploration of our own interconnectedness at the global and local scale. Céline is joining from France, and Beto is joining us from Brazil. Thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us this afternoon, Céline and Beto. We will have time at the end of the questions, for questions from the audience for Céline and Beto. So please use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Céline will be translating for Beto, so please be patient with any translation delays, and we will be sharing clips from the Tribes on the Edge film throughout the discussion. So for our first question, Céline and Beto, I'd like to ask you to tell us about your story and what compels you to tell your story.
Thank you, Abby, for that introduction, and thank you everyone who was here to help introduce this session. First of all, I just want to express gratitude for giving us this space, and gratitude to Beto for starting this whole chain reaction of storytelling. Beto estava falando sobre agradecimento para estar aqui com eles, e que você começou todo isso em pedir-me apoio. Vou contar agora meu ponto sobre a importância das histórias e depois você, tá? So I grew up in a storytelling family. I didn't know anything else. So for me, it was just kind of normal to be going off on expeditions and capturing stories and images and bringing them back to audiences around the world. The world has changed drastically. In the time of my grandfather, there were a couple of TV channels. And so, you know, when you came back from school or wherever it is that you were, the choices were limited. So a lot of people in that generation grew up with a few storytellers. Now we have the capacity of giving space for a lot of storytellers, whether it's through our social media, through traditional distribution channels, through streaming, etc. So I think that the importance of storytelling hasn't changed. It's just the access to storytelling has. Even though I grew up in this family, I didn't necessarily think I was going to follow this path. I studied psychology because I was interested in human behavior and human thinking. How is it that we are different? How is it that our behavior shifts? Why is it that certain people express mental illnesses while others are more adept at perhaps resilience or adaptation? And how is it that we can help change people's consciousness? That's the progression of where I've gone. In my master's degree, I studied intercultural relations, wanting to understand how we work and behave across cultures and what makes us professionally and personally successful while other people struggle more to deal with differences of opinions, differences in language, and differences in ways of living. I want to bring us to Beto and the importance of storytelling in his culture, but I want us to also remember that all of our cultures are made of storytellers, and it doesn't matter if you sit around a fire the way we all had traditionally told stories orally, or whether you're putting them up on Instagram. It matters what you choose to share. And there's an important message Beto shared with an audience. I'm going to share with you now. When somebody said, "What can we do?" He said, "You've seen my story, now take it forward as yours." So I want to start with that thought and bring it back towards the end. Once you have heard the story, take it forward as your own, because then it becomes yours. And when something becomes personal to you, then you are more adept at creating change. Beto lo que estaba falando un poco sobre por qué mi familia conta historias y todo eso, mi pai, mi avó y todo eso, y cómo cheguei eu a contar histórias mais com pensamento mais na psicologia, tá? Mas que agora há muitos meios de contar histórias, que não é solamente 3 canais na televisão, Tenemos streaming, tenemos redes sociais y todo eso, mas somos todos humanos compartiendo historias. E essa cosa que você falou no aquário de Baltimore, que uma pessoa falou, que posso fazer eu? E que você respondeu, agora que você escutou minha história, é a história de você, sigue contando. Así que voy a traducir, I'm just going to tell him the question. A pregunta é com tu cultura, tu pensamento, tu história, qual é essa importância das histórias e de contá-las?
Ok. A nossa forma de repassar os conhecimentos, ela é oral. Isso é específico do meu povo lá. Por exemplo, os demais também, a maioria dos 7 que compõem aquela área, né? E de forma que os mais velhos, eles repassam as informações para os mais jovens. Tudo sobre conhecimento da selva, sobre as ciências, sobre o conhecimento das relações humanas, né? Sobre as especificidades de você sobreviver num contexto da selva amazônica, como você vai ter responsabilidade com famílias futuramente, como você vai coordenar a sua família a partir de então, né? Então é o que chama de conhecimento oral. Então, para nós, o repasse da informação é vital. Sem isso, morre a história do meu povo.
So his culture, much like the 7 other contacted groups in the Vale do Javari, are oral cultures. So their entire story is passed through oral storytelling, typically from the elders to the young people. It's anything from their history, their story, but very importantly, how to live in the jungle, how to take care of your family, how to survive in the jungle. And the part that stands out, without stories, we die because we don't get the information to know how to survive. Algo mais?
Por isso que nós chamamos os velhos, são as bibliotecas marubos. Se um morre, leva todo um conhecimento com ele. Então, quanto mais velho morre, para nós não é bom, né? Daí a importância da história para nós.
The elders are basically the library, the encyclopedia of the different tribes there, and when they die, so does that story if it doesn't get shared. So the more of the elders die, the more disappears if they haven't passed it on. Tá bom?
Tá bom, eu acho que, né, a importância da história para nós, Marubo, é assim. Desculpa, sorry. Céline, a partir de agora fala sobre a história de como nós nos conhecemos? Não. Só responda a pergunta, né?
Não, mas se você quer falar de algo mais, Beto, com vontade.
Não, é só ressaltar a importância da história, né? Depois vamos ver como começou tudo isso, nós dois no Javari.
So he asked if there's more that you want to know about the importance of storytelling, or if we're going to also tell why is it that we moved forward with our common story.
We are going to move forward with asking more about your interwoven and interconnected story and your collaboration a little bit later in the discussion, but I would love to hear more, and we would love to hear more about storytelling for the Murubo and in the Javari.
Vamos a falar mais sobre nossa conexão, Beto, de tu e eu, mais adelante. Mas agora, se você tem algo mais que contar sobre a importância da história para os marubos, quizás para a gente do Javari, e depois, quizás mais, uma ideia mais grande disso, da importância.
Claro. Para elas terem uma ideia, não se sabe exatamente quantos anos os povos indígenas marubos habitam essa região lá do Vale do Javari, né? Mas, levando em consideração a importância da informação no decorrer do tempo, dá para saber a importância do que foi a história para nós viver hoje, né? Para o que nós estamos vivendo atualmente. Eu estou no século 21. Se não fosse essas bibliotecas marubos, eu não saberia nada do meu povo. Eu sei informações que eles guardam por séculos. E eu não precisou eu ir num livro, numa biblioteca. Os velhos me ensinaram. Agora, eu tenho uma responsabilidade de passar para as próximas gerações. Há uma máxima marubo que diz o seguinte: se você é um bom marubo, você tem que viver 100 anos.
Se você quer, Marumo?
Se você quer ser um bom marubo, você tem que viver 100 anos.
So he's talking about the history of the Marubo in the Javari, that there's no real knowledge of how long they've been there. And I'm shortening because of time, but also wanting to give Beto space to continue. So they're not quite sure how long the Marubo have been there. And for him, that the importance of knowledge and understanding and information and stories is told through the elders. The elders, again, are the library of information and knowledge. He doesn't need to read in a book to understand his story and how to live and survive in the jungle. And there's a saying in the Marubo people that is that if you want to be a good Marubo, you have to live 100 years.
E logo quando nós fomos aos Estados Unidos e quando fui para Polônia e tudo, com Adam, eu tive esse momento de responsabilidade. Eu fui contar a história para os jovens de 3 a 10 anos. Explicar que fui mais a Céline, em Nova York, era muito frio, a comida americana não tinha carne, era muita folha, hambúrguer, caramba, o café não era bom e as pessoas eram tudo brancas. Caramba, minha amiga Céline tinha que me ajudar porque eu não sabia pedir um café, tinha que traduzir para mim, que chato pra caramba. E eu lá no Adam, no frio, no gelo da Polônia, tudo isso, e eles, jovens até 10 anos, falavam, caramba, você fala como se fosse um pajé, você fala como uma coisa que eu não conheço, será que nós vamos viver isso? Naquele momento eu entendi a importância dos velhos, né? Eu tenho de viver 100 anos.
Que lindo, que boa, Beto. Beto has traveled to the United States with me a few times and with a friend of his who has also helped him share his message, Adam. He realized when he came back and he went back to tell the young people between the ages of 3 and 10 to tell the stories. He was saying, oh, up there in America, it's so cold and they don't eat a lot of meat. They eat a lot of leaves and the coffee's not all that good and everybody's white. So these are stories he was bringing back to the young ones. And the same thing in Polonia is that he was saying, oh, there's snow and it's cold. And so he telling these stories of his own journeys and his own learning and coming back to these 3 to 10-year-olds. We can imagine them with big wide eyes who are looking to him and saying, wow, you know a lot, you are like a shaman or a healer. And he said in that moment he realized he needs to live 100 years because he needs to keep sharing these stories, which I think is really significant in this conversation of interconnection.
And I think that is a perfect segue, thinking about needing to share one story with the follow-up question of the Tribes on the Edge was recently released, which shares the stories of the indigenous communities of the Val do Javari territory of the Brazilian Amazon. Can you share your perspective on the role of stories and storytellers in environmental and social issues?
Beto, eu vou começar, mas a pergunta é sobre o Tribes on the Edge, o filme, e a responsabilidade dos que contam histórias como essa, de compartilhar histórias de humanidade e de meio ambiente. The film Tribes on the Edge only happened because Beto asked me to tell his people's story. I was there in 2007 doing a different documentary, which was called Return to the Amazon for PBS in the United States, because we had been with my father and brother going back to places my grandfather had been to in the early 1980s. And in 25, we were documenting what had happened in those 25 years with different topics, with indigenous communities, with local communities, with cities, obviously deforestation, climate change, environment, etc. When I went to the Jvari for the first time, I was actually initially sent in to negotiate to bring our team in to the Métis tribe, which is one of the contacted tribes, not because we were wanting to favor any one of the different groups, but because that's where my grandfather went to in the early 80s. We were met, and actually this is when I first met Beto. Beto was working for FUNAI. FUNAI is the indigenous branch of government, and it's meant to support land demarcation and governance and the protection of indigenous people through laws and rights, and people on the ground who were supposed to be helping protect those territories. So I walked into the FUNAI office in Atalaya do Norte, which is the border town to the Jvari. And here's Beto with his radio, and I sit with him, and he was helping me call on the radio, call the Métis to go and film and to say, you know, what had happened in 25 years. What happened is we didn't go, but we were able to do something much more incredible. We attended a conference of all of the contacted groups, all of the different ethnicities who were coming together in a Marubo village to talk about land governance, environment, education, and what's fiscalization economy. And in the days we were there, it was actually Beto's half-brother that invited us, Clovis. Eu estou falando da história de 2007. His half-brother accompanied us, and we were able to, during those 3 days, sit and listen to, at the time it was 5 contacted groups, there's now 6, talk about the problems of health. And during the 3 days we were there, I was shocked at what I was hearing, that 80% of the population has some form of hepatitis, either A, B, C, or Delta. Malaria is obviously a huge issue, amongst other diseases. And the health branch of government that was there, the government staff that was there presenting literally with their computers and PowerPoint projecting on a hut wall, they were presenting that there were budget cuts, and that although people were dying at an increasing rate of preventable diseases, the budget was being cut and they were going to bring less help. So when I left, and we left after that part of the conference per a previous agreement, I knew I wanted to do something more than just those 3 days of filming there. And as a proper Westerner, I thought I could put a Band-Aid on a problem and just fix it. I thought for over the course of a year, I worked really hard at finding a partner university who would send their, their students in nursing school to go down and help with the situation. And I, over the course of a year, learned that that's not how it works. I would have to be on the ground and dedicate my whole life to this. And I knew that that's not what I was capable of doing. When I walked away from that project, I was heartbroken because I felt like I was letting people die. And that was a moment for me of real truth, of understanding one's own limitations, and acceptance that there's some things we can't do. It was 3 years later, now 2, because we're in 2008, Beto sends me an email. He had kept my email from that 2007 visit. And in one sentence, because I'm long-winded and Beto will just cut to the chase, in one sentence, Beto says, "We want you to come back to tell my people's story. They're dying and they need the world to know they're here." And I said, yes. And more than a decade later, Tribes on the Edge is now distributed on SVODs in the United States, and we're now starting to sign on international distribution. But I made a vow to tell a story, and it went beyond what I thought it was going to be. I think this is something you have to earn. Because if somebody asks you for help and you say yes, you have to merit that position. It's hard to ask for help. And if somebody does that, they're doing so humbled, and you should be just as humbled of the privilege to say, yes, I want to help and I can. And I've met obstacle after obstacle in this process where my conviction has been tested that I can do this. And I've had to stand back up stronger every time. And I think this is part of what this journey is creating my own story of resilience, because I live in a very privileged society, in a privileged world, where I am not menaced by, well, we all are now to a certain degree, but there's no imminent diseases. The roof's not going to fall on my head. And I think we have to earn that privilege through our lifetime. We don't have to feel guilty about it, but we have to earn it through our lifetime. And this is the gift that Beto gave me, is to ask for help. Beto, voy a hacerlo corto porque tú conoces mi historia, que estaba contando esa parte de 2007, quando fui em Vale do Javari, depois quando tentou ayudar com medicina, com ajuda sobre saúde, e que você em 2010 me mandou e-mail curtinho pedindo ajuda, e que eu falo de isso como privilégio, que você me pediu ajuda com humildade, e eu, com humildade e o privilégio que tenho, falei que sim, que foi trabalho largo e muito difícil, mas eu acho que quando uno nasce com privilégio como eu tenho que merecer. E merecer este privilégio e trabalhar para apoiar os demais.
Ótimo.
E agradeço a você para isso.
Perfeito. Posso falar agora também, não? Bem, Abigail, né? Eu acho que a Céline já contou toda a história, como aconteceu de eu ter acessado, né? Eu acho que o importante de tudo isso é que foi construindo relações, aí é um mérito da Céline, e também a própria aproximação minha do Céline. Eu acho que um outro marubo não teria essa facilidade de estarmos conversando para nós ajudarmos a região. Então, não adiantava somente eu falar com Céline, né? Eu tinha que também entender as limitações de Céline, que a Céline é mãe, que a Céline é esposa, que a Céline mora nos Estados Unidos ou França, não está perto. Então, eu tinha que entender, e outros talvez não entendessem. Eu acho que é o mais importante nessa relação que deu certo. Porque se não tivesse essa coisa junto, né, Céline, nós não conseguiríamos realizar nada, né? Não, eu acho que a importância desse entendimento também foi importante, né?
Posso
e eu lembro
um pouco, Beto?
Pode.
Posso. He was saying that since I've already told the story about how we started, that it was really, he did choose and he appointed me. What he says in the film, which it's hard for me to speak of myself, but what he says in the film is that I had a sensitivity he hadn't seen in other journalists. And that's why he approached me with this. But he says, not all Marubo are the same, that it's because he knows what he knows and he is the way he is, that he was able to approach me. Other Marubo may not understand the cross-cultural part. He also says, you know, Céline is a mother, she is a partner, she has a job, she lives overseas, she's not close by. So he he's talking about this this relationship that we are able to create because of a mutual understanding, not just of a desire to help, but of limitations within that. And that other Marubo might not see me the same way. They may interpret me as absent, or because I'm not always around, and I have other things happening. But because he is the way he is, and he is who he is, he's able to see through that.
Perfeito. E nós chegamos a nível de interação muito importante, porque estamos discutindo agora, tivemos em Baltimore, Céline me chamou a Nova York junto com uma pessoa que ficou amiga em comum, né, Céline, Nina Kancheva, Pamela Kraft, lá em Nova York. Tivemos a oportunidade de discutir em Baltimore, em Rapid City, algo assim, né, Céline? Lá também, em próprio Nova York, na sede da ONU, discutindo os problemas do Javari com todos os participantes ali, organizações de governo, não governamental. Então, a ideia que nós tínhamos lá de falar sobre o Vale do Javari para as pessoas, estamos falando agora com vocês. Então, o objetivo principal que eu queria, nós estamos alcançando aos poucos, né? Céline levou agora drones que são utilizados pelas bases do governo para fazer monitoramento da terra. Estamos discutindo como ajudar os jovens nas cidades, né? São indígenas que não têm não sabem o português, estão vivendo num lugar que não é deles, e aí são muito vulneráveis com alcoolismo, com prostituição, com problemas sociais nas cidades. O problema da hepatite, ela continuou mesmo, mas o governo brasileiro ele foi processado na justiça em várias instâncias. Esse não é o foco principal mais. Mas essa divulgação é que deu certo.
The original request to tell their people's story didn't come with a guidebook, but what he's talking about is even though I'm not there and present all the time and close by, that there's been a lot of things we've done over the years, and that through the course of all these different events that we've done, we're achieving the goal of telling the story. He mentioned a couple of different events that I brought him to and we were able to attend together. The National Aquarium of Baltimore hosted us to do a film screening and a talk together. We went to the Black Hills Film Festival, and that's where he said, wow, there's some of my people here too. He was very resistant. This is my addition, sorry. He was very resistant to coming to the United States, having an outside image of what Americans thought of Indigenous people. And I said, there are Indigenous people here too, and I think you need to meet them and understand that you're connected to them as well, and that there is goodness in this country. And we were able to do near my home, actually. So Beto stayed with me a few times, and near my home, we were able to do a sweat lodge ceremony on his behalf. So the idea of ritual was important. Estou falando da experiência com Jake, quando fazemos esta com sweat lodge dentro da transpiração. We were also able to 2 years in a row host Beto to come to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And I was partnering with Tribal Link, a woman named Pamela Kraft, who sadly passed away a few months ago, was running the organization. And our dear friend Nina Kancheva, who was instrumental in making that happen as well. And then a second year with Niatero. So the work continues, and we're making steps forward. Você falou de esses eventos, Beto, e se me olvidou a segunda parte.
Eu acredito que o evento lá na ONU foi importante, né? Eu acho que você já contou, né? Que nós tivemos o evento com vários atores e tudo.
He's saying the event at the United Nations was really important, and I can elaborate a little bit on that. there's hundreds and hundreds of Indigenous representatives that come to the UN Permanent Forum each year, but there are very few that actually get an opportunity to speak on the plenary floor. The second year, Beto, and you have 3 minutes, and there's 3 languages that are accepted, English, French, and Spanish. The second year, Beto received a space to speak, and he focused on the issue of uncontacted peoples, because the Javari has actually the largest number of uncontacted peoples in the entire Amazon. And so Beto's message is very clear. These are people that are extraordinarily vulnerable, and we need to do everything to protect them. And I am here on their behalf. It was, this is the power of social media. Estoy falando como você mandou esse video. I just recorded on my iPhone, in the plenary floor and try to do the best I can. And he immediately sent it to his colleagues in Brasilia. And it was during I believe the same manifestations that were happening yesterday, the Indigenous people's resistance in Brazil. And he said, Céline, he goes, that video was seen by over 8,000 Indigenous people, and it gave them strength to know that one of their representatives was speaking on their behalf at the United Nations. So everything matters. All stories matter. Estoy falando que quando mandaste você este video corto, quando você estava falando, que me contou que 8.000 pessoas lo estavam mirando aí no Brasil.
Sim, tipo, milhões de pessoas aqui, né? E todos estavam indígenas aqui em Brasília e viram num telão grande e comemoraram todos aqui.
He said they saw it on a big screen over there and everybody commemorated it.
I was hoping that maybe we could step back a little bit and peel back some of the history of some of the challenges that you spoke about in terms of healthcare and in terms of policy. The Tribes on the Edge film documents your partnership to share the story of the Marubo tribe, the Métis tribe, the Kulina tribe, the Mayaruna tribe, and the other indigenous peoples of the Vale do Javari territory of Brazil, and their fight for their survival and rights as guardians of globally important ecosystems. Are there stories that you would like to share from that film?
Yeah, thank you for that prompt, Abby. I think that we get so engaged in conversation with Beto, and I just, I learn every time I speak with him. I learn something new, and it's I find that fascinating. We can show a clip. I think let's start with it's clip number 1. This is a clip. Ashley, if you can pull that one up. Beto Borges, who is a partner of ours at Forest Trends. He is incredibly eloquent. He is Brazilian. And he speaks very clearly about the history of exploitation in the Amazon. So let's watch that, and we'll have a good understanding.
The exploitation of indigenous land for natural resources is nothing new. In fact, it goes back centuries when European invaders first made contact.
It's really important for us to learn from our mistakes, right? It's really important for us to learn from history. In Brazil, what happened in elsewhere in Latin America, the Spaniards came, they took over the Inca Empire. Why? Because of gold. Later on, Cabral came to Brazil in the 1500s, the explorers that would just keep pillaging indigenous peoples, slaving them to work for them. And that's what led to the exodus of the indigenous peoples that lived in the coast of Brazil and elsewhere in Latin America to areas that are considered remote.
Following the gold era, some indigenous populations declined by 90% because of diseases brought in by outsiders. From the mid-1850s to the end of the 20th century, rubber tappers invaded the Amazon, feeding the North American and European demand.
Greed is what has driven the invasion of other people's lands over the course of human history. To take what is not of our own, killing in the name of profit. And that's still what's happening today. The current paradigm of agribusiness development is really leading the deforestation that is taking place in the Amazon. In the past 30 years, we've lost 17% of the Brazilian Amazon, mostly driven by cattle ranching, soy production, palm oil, and logging.
We take their land, oil, gold, fish, timber, minerals, without thinking about the consequences.
Do mundo branco, a gente vê que as coisas a gente vê na televisão, a gente vê o mundo assim fora e vê muita coisa bom, né? Mas bom mesmo que nós vivemos aqui é mais boa ainda.
This part of the film for me is tough because it's something we keep repeating as outsiders, as Europeans, as Westerners. We keep taking, and the fact that this has been happening since the 16th century is unforgivable. Beto, estoy falando que es muito difícil a ver que os brancos, os europeus e todo eso, que sempre estão levando coisa que não é deles, sem pensamento nos indígenas. É a história.
Claro. O Vale do Javari é a segunda terra indígena do país. Dados técnicos indicam que nós vivemos ali há séculos, não sei quantos anos. Existe histórico da nossa existência lá, levantamentos antropológicos, documentais, que os marubos ainda atacaram os jesuítas em tipo 1300, 1200. Nós estávamos matando padres naquela região. Nós vivemos esses séculos inteiros e não foi preciso derrubar a floresta. Não foi preciso, para nós nos desenvolvermos, não foi necessário ter a mesma lógica de desenvolvimento que vocês. Aonde vocês chegam, a primeira coisa que vocês acham é derrubar as florestas, é acabar com a vida na Terra, praticamente. Até hoje, nós não entendemos essa lógica burra que todos vocês têm. E vocês dizem que vocês são civilizados e que nós somos, tipo, primitivos. Somos povos que, sei lá, não tinha Deus, não tinha alma, eram estranhos, né? Mas hoje, no século XXI, nós estamos demonstrando que nós temos razão. Não por acaso, no Brasil, as terras onde ainda há uma conservação da natureza é a nossa casa. São nessas terras. Nós estamos demonstrando para vocês que vocês estão matando a terra. E o mais ridículo é que não há garantia nenhuma, não há uma outra terra, né? Então, nós vivemos por séculos num lugar, não foi preciso nós desmatarmos. Eu hoje tenho 40 anos, vivi nessa terra, e hoje eu estou falando com vocês da minha cultura, do meu povo, da minha existência, e as pessoas ainda estão comendo macaco, antas, fazendo roçados lá. Eles existem ainda. Então, o mundo de vocês tem que parar, pensar e ouvir por que essas populações desenvolveram no decorrer dos séculos e não foi preciso acabar com a Terra.
Posso?
Oh,
There's a lot of really important things in what Beto just said. I'm going to try to do it justice. The Vale do Javari is the second largest indigenous territory in Brazil. It's 85,000 square kilometers, which is the size of Portugal, Austria, or the state of Maine. I'm going to elaborate. There's about 7,000 indigenous people, 2,000 of which are uncontacted. There are stories and information that date the Marubo back at least to the 1200s, when they had killed Jesuits and priests that had tried to come in. He says they don't have the same logic as us. Where we go, we deforest, we cut trees, and we destroy, we end life. They don't understand our logic. He says we say they are primitive, but look at what we're doing and where we are. In the 21st century, they are now showing how to live, which is the way they always have. There is less deforestation on indigenous land than even on conservation land. And conservation land is recuperating or attempting to protect something. But the indigenous people are the current and always guardians of these territories in the best way possible. He says, you are killing Earth. Where else are you going to go? Today I am 40. I'm speaking of my culture. And you are still acting like you want to destroy things. You really need to stop and listen. Algo mais, Beto?
hoje, a Terra, os brancos todos, né, descobriram que as terras com as árvores são importantes, né? E mesmo assim, agora nós temos de estar juntos, não importa o país, Estados Unidos, Europa, todos os países têm que proteger o que sobrou, né? O restante de florestas, né? Mas mesmo assim ainda não vejo algo concreto, né? As autoridades hoje pensam, é culpa de vocês. Aí outro culpa, não, é culpa dos Estados Unidos, culpa da França, culpa da Alemanha, culpa do não sei o quê. Você é culpado. Mas as florestas continuam num processo de destruição contínua ainda, não parou. No Brasil, isso está acontecendo. Então, é essa lógica que nós não compreendemos ainda. Não temos tempo mais para perder, né? Ou a gente faz agora, ou a gente vai morrer. Vocês vão ter que ir lá para Marte. Vocês estão buscando fazer casa lá, eu vi na televisão. Lá não tem água, porra. Vocês vão morrer lá também.
He says, today, white people have discovered that earth and birds are important. Today, we need to be together. We need to protect all of this, but I'm not seeing anything concrete. No matter who is responsible, it still continues. He's talking about how we point fingers to the culpability of others, whether it's the United States or France or Germany or another country, but that we are all responsible and no one's willing to take action to do something about it. He says, we have no more time. It's today or we die. He's like, where else are you going to go? Mars? There's no water there. You'll die there too.
Going off. Sorry.
I was just going to propose that we show one more clip. We've talked about the environmental and social issues and the history. The reason all of this, I think, started too was through the health, what I heard about health issues that were happening there and still are, with the high rates of hepatitis and malaria and other diseases. I think more than ever, this is something that might resonate with audiences everywhere because we're dealing with the global pandemic that no country escapes. And hopefully, my hope is that this will be an opportunity for us to understand that this is only the beginning of a collective threat to our health, and that we need to really start taking responsibility for that. Beto, vamos a ver uma parte sobre as enfermedades no documentário. Abigail, if you wouldn't mind running clip number 4, that would be great.
Armando is the second son of the chief, and in the chief's absence, he represents his village.
Que eu sou agente de saúde daqui da Rio Novo, do Rio Novo, da aldeia. E as doenças, muitas assim que acontecem nessa comunidade, assim, a toda a comunidade do Vale do Javari, que acontece, muitos parentes morrem com hepatite. Morreram 4 pessoas no mesmo tempo. Um dia, outro dia aconteceu. Depois que fizeram o exame, descobriram que era hepatite, né? Muitas assim, malária, muita malária. Um ano e 6 meses.
Um ano e 6 meses já.
4 malária.
4 malária.
4 casos de malária.
E o menino está recuperando.
Tá recuperando, já tá cansado, fica fraco.
E gartana timpa ansare chando kamta. E marare que chando miscas quinta que
ele
tacanai.
Ela já teve muitas malárias. Ele não se encontra
E eu não
mais
sei quantas.
Muita malária.
12 anos maro abo pigamta chando.
Quando ela tinha 12 anos, teve malária, quase que ela não ficava paralisada.
The malaria pathogen originated in Africa and arrived in the Americas in the 16th century when European settlers and the West African slaves they brought sailed across the Atlantic. As for the virulent spread of hepatitis in the Javari, there are 2 theories. The first is that it originated in the Peruvian side of the Peru-Brazil border. In Peru, many indigenous peoples are not protected from outsiders, which include drug traffickers, gold miners, and loggers. When they cross the river into Brazil to visit other tribal members, they may have brought hepatitis with them into the Javari. The second explanation is controversial, a conspiracy theory that is gaining momentum, that the Brazilian government knowingly infected members of the tribes of the Javari to remove them from the land. Understanding that demarcated indigenous territories are protected from outsiders as long as there are tribal members living there, it's no wonder that indigenous people are convinced that they are being systematically exterminated to unlock the rainforest for agribusiness and resource extraction worth billions. Whether or not this is true, the fact that many in the Javari believe it only exacerbates the feeling of distrust.
That clip was sobering to the situation and the health challenges that are faced, and certainly puts us in mind to think about things with the COVID-19 crisis. So this has really connected to a theme we've been talking about through this discussion about interconnectedness, and certainly the role that the global community has played and continues to play in this narrative of the indigenous communities of the Val du Javari territory. How else do you think that the global community can play a role or should play a role in the future?
I'm going to hand this question to Beto. Beto, a pergunta é se ampliarmos essa pergunta número 4, se ampliarmos essa ideia de interconexão entre todo o que está passando no mundo, que lá é como aqui, vocês como eu, qual é o papel da comunidade global na história dos marubos e do Vale do Javari? O que podem fazer?
Algumas questões no Brasil, elas são muito, como posso dizer, ruim. O governo não vai atender, né? Então, existe a comunidade, ela pode contribuir nos ajudando a manter esses quadros. Por exemplo, precisamos de resolver a questão do êxito das crianças para as cidades, né, Céline? Precisamos, porque, assim, como não há uma educação na aldeia, as crianças jovens estão indo para cidades e gerando problemas sociais. Nas cidades, não estão preparados para atender indígenas, são indígenas que não falam português, né? Há uma questão também ambiental, né? Hoje, a agência do governo federal que cuida da questão ambiental nossa é precária, não há uma proteção ambiental eficaz, né? E eu acredito que a comunidade internacional, por meio de pessoas como Céline, pode contribuir, né, com a ajuda que for necessário, né, de função, de apresentar essas informações para a mídia, falar para os seus governos dessa importância dessa terra com a maior quantidade de índios isolados, prover, né, essas conexões como a Céline faz com a nossa terra. É alguém que tem uma ligação direta conosco, pode dar condição para que ela ajude a minimizar esses problemas. Toda ajuda é bem-vinda.
Obrigado, Beto. It says the government isn't going to help. The Brazilian government's not going to help. So they're not counting on them at all. Here are a few suggestions that he made. Help maintain or help with dealing with the young people that are going to cities, because it leads to a lot of social issues. The cities are not ready for them. These are people that don't necessarily speak Portuguese. Cultures are also very different. What he had mentioned earlier in our conversation that I hadn't translated, so apologies, was that a lot of the young people who come even into the border town of Atalaia, amongst other places, often fall into issues of alcoholism, drugs, and prostitution. I want to add to that in outside the Javari territory, and one of the huge current and ongoing threats are illegal activities. So there's gold mining, deforestation, illegal hunting and fishing, and to the north, narco trafficking. And what's happening is some of the indigenous people are falling into being carriers or helping with some of the illegal activity entering the land because they're looking for opportunities. So offering opportunities and helping with the young people. The second one he mentioned was more environmental, because right now there's no effective system. He did say that through people such as myself, we are there helping, and we have a direct connection to the land, that I'm in direct contact with him and a few other people. And so, I mean, this is over a decade of creating trust. So he was advocating for supporting the work that we're doing in the area. And then something that comes more from there to the outside as opposed to something coming in is presenting the story to media, making sure that this is always talked about and constantly in front of the media, talking to governments, so our own governments, and continuing to do what we're doing here today and what I'm doing with the education program with the IIC, amongst other type of projects, which is to prove the connections that we have to each other. And again, he was advocating, Céline is working on this. I'm definitely not the only one. There's a lot of, there's great Brazilian organizations. There's Niatero, União da Amazônia Viva, Outras organizações que estão trabalhando lá, Beto?
Não, EDS, né, Expedicionário da Saúde, tem a participação do... O Sebastião Salgado tem nos ajudado também muito com essas articulações. Você também, né?
So there's a couple of organizations and individuals. I know Scott Wallace has written a great book called The Unconquered, and he's a regular Nat Geo author. So he has written articles about the Javari. Expedicionários da Saúde, which is health expeditions, has done some work there as well. União da Amazônia Viva and Niatero, as I've mentioned. So those are a few of the organizations that are working directly with the Javari. Beto, você acha, estou pensando que vamos a mostrar, porque estou mirando a hora, que são as 10:12. Se queremos que a gente pode perguntar, vamos a ver clipe mais do documentário, tá?
Perfeito. Okay.
Okay. So we're just going to watch one more clip. This is Beto Borges again calling on the global community. I think this is a good way to end the visual part of this with the same message of interconnectedness. Ashley, if you could run, it's clip number 6, that would be great, please.
We can't change history. We can't change the past, but we can make a better future by knowing our own past, what we've done, what we could have done differently, how we feel about it, and how we act on it today based on what the past teaches us.
Essas terras indígenas se destinam, o povo que vive ali possa continuar a sua vida tradicional, porque eles nunca destruíram o meio ambiente. Os homens hoje raciocinam com o bolso, é com o dinheiro que eles raciocinam. Não há mais sentimento de amor à terra, de preservação, do cuidado que nós temos que ter com o outro, exterminar o meio ambiente. É lamentável que a gente veio viver e estamos vivendo uma época dessa, né? É muito ruim. Mas, enfim, temos que combater isso e não desanimar.
If I can just jump in, I think that's hopefully this doesn't leave everyone on any kind of doom and gloom. I mean, these are really heavy subjects, but Beto and I have been known to share a beer and have a good laugh as well. So we have to remember to uplift. And Sidney Pozuelo is a very important person in Indigenous history in Brazil. He's an Indigenous defender, and he has really stood by Indigenous peoples throughout the Amazon. And I had the tremendous privilege of sitting with him for a good afternoon in his home to speak with him. And those last words, not lose hope, not lose heart, is how it's translated, I think is really important. Estoy falando, Beto, de no olvidar que todo eso está muy pesado, muy difícil, todo eso, mas você e eu compartimos uma cerveja e reímos. Y lo que faló esto de Sidney Pozuelo, que no tenemos que perder este corazón, esta esperanza. É importante porque senão não vamos a fazer nada.
Claro.
So just to return to one of the objectives that were in the suggestions that Beto mentioned for how the global community can address the needs for support for Indigenous communities in the Val do Javari. What has this collaboration, just to return to this collaboration, what has it taught you about your interwoven stories and your interconnectedness?
Essa vai ser a última pergunta, Beto, que é a pergunta 5, não sei se você vai ter em frente. Vou começar e depois te vou traduzir, tá?
Ok. Eu vou falar ou você?
Como quer? Você quer começar e eu termino?
Sim, pode ser. Você fala mais rápido.
He says he'll start because I speak faster. Eso es sobre cuando se enseñó esta colaboración sobre nuestra historia interconectada y lo que significa.
Eu não conhecia esta menina, Abigail, até alguns minutos atrás, eu não conhecia essas outras pessoas que eu falei até minutos atrás. Eu não conhecia você antes de 2007. Eu não conhecia um monte de pessoas antes de 2000, de vários tempos, né? E hoje eu estou falando com ela, daqui do Brasil. Eu, ironicamente, não estou na minha aldeia, estou na capital do Brasil. Aqui eu conheci outras pessoas também. E, dessa forma, a gente conseguiu fazer muita coisa. Daí a importância dessas inter-relações, né, de fazer aquilo que tem que ser feito. Não ficar esperando. Ok, o que eu posso fazer? Caramba, eu não tenho dinheiro. Qual é uma boa ideia? Faça. Apenas faça. Né, Céline? Você estava lá na França com o seu filho, com o seu marido, fazendo um trabalho. Vou cuidar de golfinhos, sei lá, dos mares, não sei aonde, como seu avô fazia, mas você estava matando pium conosco, tomando banho num lugar cheio de cobras e jacaré, não? E você mudou isso. Eu acho que todo mundo tem que ser assim. A gente pode. Eu aprendi isso. Eu aprendi. Há uma máxima, Marubo, que fala o seguinte: se você vai falar, né? Se você sabe falar, você pode conseguir muitas mentes, né? Não por acaso eu aprendi o português. Agora eu vou ter que aprender inglês para falar com eles também.
Tá bom. He said, but before this call, he didn't know Abigail. Now he knows Abigail. Before we were on this session, we had a tech check, and he met every person that's behind the scenes and that spoke. Now he knows them. And everybody that's been listening, now we're connected, and these are the interrelations. Before 2007, he didn't know me. He now lives in Brasilia. He's not in his village. He's in Brasilia because he's there. He has met a lot of people. Because he's there, he's able to create change. And that is the power of these relationships, these interconnections that we have to each other. And now that we are connected, we can create that change. He says, every person that speaks can do something. So don't just leave it to the talk, but move, make it happen. He says, I am, we all can. And then he talks about my story here in France and my son and my partner and protecting dolphins in the ocean ecosystem. And yet I showed up, and that we all can. He says there is a saying that he wanted to share, that if you speak, you can capture many minds. Beto, essa foi muito forte. Obrigada. I don't know that I want to add anything to that. I think that's answers the question very adequately. Beto, você está no mute. Está apagado.
Queria compartilhar para acabar agora com a minha fala. Quando eu era jovem, tipo 17 anos, eu queria ser como meu avô, um cara forte, um guerreiro que coordenava um clã inteiro, mais de 300 pessoas. E eu queria ser como ele. Eu queria falar como ele. Eu ia ter uma maloca grande com 2 mulheres, como ele. Eu mudei de ideia. Eu acho que eu posso ajudar eles. Não precisa ter 2 mulheres, não precisa coordenar um clã de 300 pessoas. A gente pode fazer nossa parte, por mínima que pode fazer. Às vezes, o mínimo que você faz, você transforma o mundo, né? E eu acredito que eu cheguei mais ou menos. Eu não transformei o mundo ainda, mas eu fiz coisas incríveis para eles, para o meu povo e para todo o Javari, com 6.000 pessoas. Não para 300 pessoas.
When I was 17 years old, I wanted to be like my grandfather. He was the chief of my tribe, of my village. I wanted to be strong like him and command. I wanted to have a big house like his and 2 wives like him. But I've changed. I moved to the city. I don't need the same things anymore. I don't need 2 wives to make change happen. I don't need a big home. He says we can all do at least the minimum, and with this you can change the world. He says, with what I have done with my life, I have done incredible things for the Javari, all of them, not just my village. I want to echo something that Beto, eu vou a falar minutinho. I want to echo something that I think is really important for all of us to understand. Beto and his brother Eliesio were sent away when they were 16, 17 years old to learn the white person's world. And when they say white, it's not just skin, it's all outsiders. His brother has become a lawyer and is using his skills and expertise in defending indigenous peoples. Beto has become a spokesperson on many levels at civil society, but also on the governmental political level. And they have really honored their ancestors in doing this and carrying this forward. He's lived and existed in 2 worlds, and so there's a big duality there. But there's a sacrifice that he's made. It's because he stayed on the outside to keep better defending his people, which is something that I wonder if we're all willing to do, is to take a stretch out into the uncomfortable to do something that's necessary. And I admire that. I admire that because he has to navigate. He's soon, just a personal story, I hope he doesn't mind me sharing, but I'll tell him, he's soon going to have to, because he is the heir to be the chief. His father passed away a few years ago, and he's being asked to come back. But he now has a wife and 2 children who are Brazilian and live in the city. So it's a completely different reality than we face. Beto estava falando que você, com seu irmão Eliesio, foram mandados para aprender o mundo do branco, para depois poder proteger, que você está fazendo exatamente o que su povo lhe pediu. Estão defendendo como pode. É um sacrifício de não estar com seu povo. Mas que agora você vai estar pedindo ao seu povo de regressar. Vai ter que tomar uma decisão. E é difícil porque vives em dualidade.
Isso. Mas são sacrifícios que são válidos, vale a pena.
Yeah. They're valid sacrifices, they're worth it.
Beto, I just want to say I am so sorry for your loss, and my thoughts are with you.
Que dice que está muito triste para que perdeu seu pai.
Foi triste, mas, enfim, é aquela velha história, né, Céline? Nós temos de merecer estar vivo agora.
Yes.
A gente sempre tem que merecer.
Yeah. That's something I've learned, and I love hearing it again. He goes, it's sad, but it's okay. We have to be worthy of being alive. We need to be worthy.
É isso, acho que já está finalizando de qualquer forma, né, Céline? Mas eu quero pedir
uma pergunta.
Mas eu queria terminar minha fala dizendo que eu agradeço o convite, a Céline também me ajudou, e eu não sei falar inglês, eu prometo um dia falar você em inglês, eu estou tentando falar inglês, e aí vai melhorar. Desculpa pelo tempo, só isso.
He said he's grateful for being invited by all of you and myself, and that he hopes to work on his English one day.
If I could, I would love for you to address one question from our audience. I just want to apologize for our audience participants. I know they've asked many wonderful questions, But we have one question from Nubia, which is, what practices did you employ that you may consider as privileged storytellers to ensure that we walk gently and humbly, and how we support our Indigenous relatives in amplifying their stories?
Would be great if you could write that story. If somebody can translate, I'll speak while somebody does that, put it in the chat so he can see it. I'm cognizant of time as well. Eles van a traducir. A pergunta está lá, viene de uma pessoa que está escutando. Vou empezar depois para você, Beto, okay?
Okay.
I think something that I have learned in my own process in telling this story is treading lightly is really important. I've had to learn over the course of this decade plus what it means to be an Indigenous ally in a white person's skin. And it's not always easy, and I don't think it should be. I think we have to assume the responsibility for what we don't know, but that if we approach things sincerely and we are open to learning and to listening, we learn and we listen. And we do so with the intention of serving the person we work for and the people we work for. I always show pictures of the Indigenous people in the Javari, and I say, these are my bosses. This is who I work for. And when I tell a story, when I share my film, I have to make sure that that's the audience I'm telling it for. They trusted me, and they trusted, therefore, Beto to ask me to tell their story. So it's why the film is an independent film. It's why I didn't get outside funding. It's why I was begging unsustainably for funding to be able to free of the shackles of needing to do the story so it would sell or so that it would make a Netflix happy. I did it for them. And so it had to be the long road. And I think when you embrace that, yeah, it's a difficult path, but it's necessary in order to, again, what Beto says, deserve. And that's all I can share. It's not going to be not a reflection on what I think of my film, but in the eyes of the public, it may not be a blockbuster film because it doesn't meet the criteria of entertainment and the ebb and flow of a usual script. But my most frightening day with this film and my most proud day is when I brought it to the Indigenous people of the Javari and showed them the film in 2019, in November 2019. That's who I did this for. And no matter film festival rejections or difficulty in distribution or praises or compliments, it was that moment that mattered. And I think that's when you know you're doing it for the right reasons. You have to earn it. Beto estava falando sobre a minha sentimento de fazer este documentário para você, para os povos indígenas, não pensando em prêmio ou cumprimentos ou tudo isso, mas pensando em mostrar o documentário para você. Esse novembro de 2019 na Atalaia, e que isso foi o dia importante para mim. Esse foi o dia que eu senti que esse documentário foi terminado. E agora posso dar o mundo. Não sei se você tem algo que perguntar sobre esta, de falar sobre esta pergunta, essa que leíste no chat.
Como é a pergunta? Eu não entendi.
A pergunta é quais melhores práticas que você empregou que podemos considerar como contadores de histórias privilegiadas para garantizar que andamos com gentileza e humildade em contar histórias indígenas. Que podemos fazer nós?
Eu acho que, primeiramente, tem que ter um razoável conhecimento das realidades, né? Porque senão a história ela fica meio que de única pessoa, vamos dizer assim, né? As histórias, você tem que saber como contar elas de verdade, porque senão elas se tornam uma história mentirosa. Algo óbvio. Você, para contar a história desse filme, você teve que ir na aldeia, né? Passar na selva, andar dias. No filme conta a dificuldade, tá longe da família, com muito P1, caramba, você sofreu, aquele cara com a perna inchada de P1. Mas você contou uma história que foi coletada lá. Então, eu acredito que as pessoas têm que compreender primeiro, para depois contar as histórias. Eu acho que é fundamental isso. No mais, é replicar essas histórias, né? Essa história que você fez, desse filme, ela pode ser replicada para vários. Nós estamos no momento ideal para contar essa história. Esse é o momento ideal no mundo, né? O que está acontecendo na Amazônia? Deflorestamento, governo Bolsonaro idiota. Entende? As pessoas têm que compreender o que está acontecendo na Amazônia hoje. Essa história foi feita em 2017, mas ela é nova. Então, as pessoas têm que contar ela, replicar ela.
He says, first of all, you should have a good knowledge of stories and tell the truth, and tell the stories the way they are being told to you. He again referred to me as an example that I had to go and spend time in the jungle. I had to live with the tribes. I had to travel the same distances, which are quite long. He's brought up plumes. Plumes are little like sand flies, and that my whole body was covered in bites, and I had to go through that process. Sorry, I itch every time I think about it. That I had to go through that process in order to understand life there as well. You have to understand the stories in order to tell them, and that this film can be an example of what that is. This is an ideal moment to tell this story because it's still happening in the Amazon. It doesn't matter that it was filmed 2013, 14, and 15. It's still very relevant. It's still today. So yeah, I think the strong thing there is to understand. You have to understand in order to tell the stories. And again, I echo what he has said. Now you've heard the story, take it forward as your own.
I would just like to echo and say that what a wonderful point to end on, the call to action and to earning your action. And I would like to just conclude by firstly thanking you, Beto and Céline, for sharing your time and expertise with us tonight. And thank you to our audience for staying tuned with us. And thank you for inviting us to listen to the stories of the Indigenous communities of the Val de Javari territory, and for guiding us through the process of exploring how our own stories are interwoven and our own interconnectedness. We have learned a lot and appreciated you sharing your stories. We encourage you all to watch the Tribes on the Edge film, which can be found on Amazon Prime, iTunes, YouTube, and to learn more about the stories of the Indigenous communities of the Val de Javari territory. We would also like to thank Brooke Rains for her help with this event and all of the Sustainability Symposium partners, and to all of you for attending this evening. Please join us tomorrow from 6 to 7:30 for keynote speaker Winona LaDuke. As Calandra mentioned earlier, we have an opportunity after tomorrow's event to participate in a breakout discussion. To apply what we've learned tonight, please bring your questions that you generated from this evening or this afternoon from Céline and Beto and Winona to improve William & Mary's sustainability and social justice efforts, and to apply these lessons to explore our own interconnectedness.
Beto, isso foi agradecimento para nós e mensagem para os participantes.
Claro, perfeito.
If I can just ask everybody, I know that we're very short on time, but this is something that I think is important for us all to remember. We all breathe, and 20% of our global oxygen comes from the Amazon rainforest. So if we just take 5 breaths and think that that 5th breath comes from this rainforest ecosystem, and remember that where there are Indigenous people, there's less deforestation than even on conservation land, then we can understand that we're completely interconnected with their lives and they are with ours. So don't forget to breathe.